Welcome to Take a Wander with Shebs. My guest at this point is the author of Travel Mania, Stories of Wanderlust, Karen Gershowitz. Karen, it's great to have you on. How are you and where in the world are you?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm doing great, and I am right in the middle of Manhattan in New York City.
So for people who don't know who you are, Karen, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a native New Yorker. I am a fanatic traveler. I wrote a book and I was going to call it Travel Junkie. My publisher said, no, you can't call it that. But it is apt because if I don't go somewhere for a while, I'm in need of a serious fix. And I changed my whole life. I started out as a ceramicist and became a person in business largely so that people would pay for my travel and send me around the globe. And it in fact worked out. And then I've gone back to, my creativity comes out in writing. Well, that's the thing that I'm interested in now. But as I say, I was a ceramicist.
Just explore your early beginnings. And I think you actually talk about this in your book as well, how you actually first fell in love with traveling itself.
The very beginning, I got fascinated by other cultures. My mother, for many reasons, could not travel, but she loved and was curious about other cultures. And living in New York City, we would go to the museums and we would go to performances of anything that came from anywhere. And we would go to every cuisine you can imagine. And in New York City, even when I grew up, which was a long time ago in the 1950s, you could get almost any cuisine. I joked that I was one of the few kids, other than in Japan, who liked sushi at about age 8 and, could very, very well use chopsticks very well. So she got me into that. And then when I was, I guess, maybe 9 or 10, my grandmother, who was an immigrant from what is actually outside of Kiev, so the Ukraine, decided she was going to travel the country. She just buried her third husband and decided that she was ready to go see the US, her adopted homeland, got on a Greyhound bus and traveled all over the US by herself. And I was fascinated that she had the nerve to do it. And then my mother said, yeah, go. I think that's terrific. And then a couple of years later, after another trip through the US, she decided she was going to go back to Kiev and find her relatives. She took off, suitcases full of stuff, because nobody had anything and it made her look wealthy, and came back with nothing because there was nothing to bring except a photograph of a second cousin of mine. And my grandmother said, "You look just like her." And it astounded me. There I had this cousin who indeed looked just like me. And so now I really wanted to see that part of the world. And that was kind of the beginning of it.
Let me talk about your book, Travel Mania, Stories of Wanderlust, because you talk about your grandmother early on as one of your inspirations. Her name is Bella.
Ella.
But actually, the first chapter you talk about your father actually as well, because you were doing road trips early on. So your father, in some respects, was the first person to take you on the road and experience what traveling was like. Was that initial hook as well?
It was, but it was my mother who planned all the trips. My father kind of reluctantly went along. My mother planned them, and we went up to Canada, and we explored the area a fair bit. Exploring a place where English was not the first language was so fascinating to me. Hearing French, I'd been used to hearing Yiddish and hearing Russian, but I'd never heard anyone converse in French. And came as I was just fascinated by it. And of course, I was a little kid, and my parents couldn't speak French, and I became the interpreter for everyone because it made me very brave. I joke about the fact that I got to be very, very good at pantomimes. I could communicate, do charades with people and communicate with them. And when a little kid does it, they're charmed by it. I don't know that if I did it now, they'd be so charmed, but they were absolutely charmed by it. And so I thought, oh, this is great. I can communicate with people even if I don't know the language. And of course, that was both a plus and a negative because I never learned to speak another language fluently. But I've managed to get all over the world where I do not speak the language and have never felt concerned about it because I learned from an early age that if you smile a lot and people are responding to you, you really can communicate even without knowing the language fluently.
What was the initial reason why you wanted to jot down all your? Because if you look at it, it's like a 60-year, almost a career within the travel. Why have the urge to tell your story? What was the reason behind it all?
Well, I come back to my mother. My mother really was a huge inspiration. She had me, I found a travel journal from when I was 8 years old. And I had little drawings and a few words about we'd gone to Florida. And she insisted that every time we took a trip, she said, if you want to remember it, you need to take some photographs and make a journal. And she really got me into the habit. And then my very, very first solo trip, which was quite a first solo trip, is I moved to London. Well, I moved to first to the Netherlands and then to London. And I took a zillion photographs and it was all new to me. Everything was brand new. And I knew, and I don't know how I knew, that I really wasn't going to remember my first impressions unless I wrote them down. Now, they were not every day then because I was living there for 3 years. But if I went for a long weekend to Switzerland, or if I went for a long weekend to Italy, as I did, um, I kept a travel journal and I just got into the habit of it. And I have travel journals that go back from the time that I lived in London, which started in 1970. So I have very, very complete travel journals.
What advice would you give when it comes to writing a travel story? How do you go about keeping things in, excluding things? Is it worth getting a mentor? Is it worth getting a coach? What did you exactly do?
I was writing stories just to write the stories down. And I wasn't even thinking of a book at the time that I started. I did take writing classes because I was never a writer. I wrote professionally, but not personal narrative. And the more I wrote, the more I started understanding which stories had universal appeal, as opposed to stories that interested me. And what was the point of writing a particular story? And I would make lists. I have lists and lists and lists of things that I could write about. Somebody said to me, "You're going to run out of stories." I said, "No, if you travel enough, you never run out of stories." I see you nodding to that one, and I'm sure you agree. And I'm interested more in connections with people and my experiences and the food and the culture, and less interested in I saw this, I saw that. That's not what I'm interested in because that's not the interesting part of travel. The interesting part of travel are the connections you make either between cultures or between yourself and other people. And so I started making these lists and writing a few paragraphs about them and actually showing them to people and saying, of these, which are most interesting. And I got a real sense of which ones had the most universal appeal. And there were other stories that I thought needed to be in there, even if they didn't have universal appeal, because they said a lot about me, and I was never going to capture it in a couple of paragraphs. But I threw out as much as stayed in the book. I overwrote by a lot.
And I think that's a
Um,
good thing, by the way, to overwrite as much as possible because you always edit out what's not
Absolutely.
required and whatever's in your mind, whatever, right from your heart.
And I think you have to understand why you're telling the story. What's the point of it? Is it just a nice anecdote? Well, if it's a nice anecdote, is that really enough to sustain it? Or is there some other reason that you're writing it? The story about my grandmother is not just because it's, a story about an interesting, an unusual woman who traveled at a time when women did not travel alone. And she was in her 60s and 70s at the time, which was really unusual. It was about what I took from seeing her. and why it was so important in my life. And I have other stories in the book that are equally important, places that, you know, if you read the story about India, I had perceptions of India. And that was one of the few countries that I had, large countries that I had never been to. And I started to explore why. And the more I thought about it, I said, I have to write the story of going. I have to go. And now I have to write the story of being there because of my reactions to what was around me.
That's the most important thing when I was reading it, your perception was changing and the reasons for your travel kept changing. And that's an important thing as well. What exactly are you traveling for? What does travel really mean to you? Are you just doing it for the sake of, I just want to travel? It's something to do. People reading the book will find out actually you were transforming as the travels went on. With my travels as well, perspective changes over
Yes.
time. Every single travel, no matter where, you might have gone to the same place over and over again, but each time, I always think that you're going to learn something different about yourself, about the people, the place itself. And I think that's what comes across from the book as well. And you also mentioned, by the way, about yourself traveling at a time when travel really wasn't common as it is right now. And especially, as you said as well, as a woman traveling, especially solo.
Yes.
So those were questions maybe you had people asking you. What are you doing? Why are you traveling solo? Did you get those questions at the time? Why did you want to travel?
The first question that people in the US would ask is, aren't you afraid to do it? That was always the first question. And my response was always no. People are really wonderful no matter where you go. I've rarely gotten into trouble. I mean, I was careful, but I'm also a native New Yorker. So, you have a certain innate sense of what's dangerous and what isn't. But when I got overseas, people would ask me, gee, we've never seen an American. Why did you come here? What brought you to this place? Particularly when I've been in really out of the way places. And sometimes my answers surprise them, and sometimes they surprise me as to why I've gone somewhere. I spent time in Indonesia, and in Indonesia, I had so many experiences that surprised me that it was really revelatory to me that here I was in a country that certainly most Americans don't think about very often. And every island's a different culture. Every island has a whole different language and way of being. And I initially went because I'd read an article in National Geographic, and I was fascinated by it and said, I have to go see this for myself. It's like nowhere I've been in the world. And in fact, that was true. But when I started planning the trip and I ended up traveling for 3 months through Indonesia, um, I had so many surprises in terms of what I saw, the people I met, even just how I got around. Indonesia, the first conversation you have with anyone is, are you married and do you have children?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, no, I'm single, I don't have children. Well, that was it. The conversation died. So I had to do something, and I went out and bought a silver ring, put it on my ring finger, and invented a family. And as it happens, I was dating someone very seriously at the time, and I had a niece and a nephew. So I had I had the characters down, and that was my story. And after that, they wouldn't ask me about my family and why I was traveling alone, as long as I had a husband and kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first thing that surprised me. And once I had that down, then it became, why are you coming here?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because I live in New York, almost everybody on the globe has heard of New York, no matter where you are. And so they're curious about New York. And why would I come from a place like New York to this remote village? So that starts a conversation. And the more of those kinds of conversations you get into, and the more people realize you're really interested in it, the more they talk with you.
Dream for a lot of people in certain remote places is to head to London, head to New York. That is a dream for people. They can't understand why I would go to their country and why I'd want to see their place and you tell them is because, well, sometimes people have different reasons. Of course, we've just
Sure.
mentioned your reasons for traveling. There has been loads of times where things have gone wrong as well. So
Oh,
it's
of
not just
course.
so, and that's what travel is about, really. So you go through obstacles and just tell us a little bit about. Because I know that there's loads to pick from, but what would you say happened to you that really changed your perspective?
Well, one of the things that I wrote about was a place where I was terrified, and it was terror for, and I rarely feel that way. I had gone to Sao Paulo on business, and my client had put me up in the absolute best hotel in Sao Paulo, which I really wish they hadn't done. And it was a financial institution, and the security both in the hotel and going to my clients' offices, I'd never seen anything like it. And I work a lot in the financial industry, so I've seen a lot of security. This was a whole different level. And the stories that everyone was telling me about how dangerous Sao Paulo was, I never got to see Sao Paulo. I mean, they told me not to go out of the hotel unless they gave me a taxi that they had approved. Don't go walking around because the minute you leave the hotel, you're a target.
Mhm.
And I thought, there are people who live like this all the time. They live in this kind of fear. I don't ever want to feel this kind of fear again. And for somebody who's not fearful of anything really, it came as a profound shock to be that scared. And I realized I was listening to things and I wasn't using my own common sense.
Mhm.
And by time now admittedly I was working all day, so I wouldn't have had much time to go out and explore, but even to take a walk in the morning or a walk in the evening, they had scared me enough that I didn't do that. And I regret that. I regret that to this day that I never saw Sao Paulo at all.
There's always going to be horror stories. Our governments here will tell us before you go somewhere, don't do this, don't do that. I never listen to anything. You got to use your. You have to be smart, of course, when you travel.
Yes,
You have to be street smart, as I say. But you learn that as you travel more and more. You go to one place, you do the things where it's out of your comfort zone to an extent, but also you have to be obviously conscious of
yes,
making sure you keep yourself safe because you don't want to get mugged or you don't want to get well, other things could happen.
right.
So you just have to be smart. You have to be wary, and I think that comes with experience of traveling. But Sasha, have you? Assuming you've gone back to Sao Paulo to see Sao Paulo?
I have not. I have
Oh,
not.
good. Okay. Is that
I will at some point.
at some point, yeah, your gut will tell you whether it's right or not. And you only get that from traveling. One of the things I always want to discuss with you is you're not in the travel industry, you weren't in this sector itself, and you were working. When you were working, I remember you specifically wrote it in one of the chapters that you would only have a certain amount of time off in America. A lot of people know this. I've spoken about this on my shows with a lot of American guests. You only get a specific, and I think nowadays you still get around about a 10-day vacation time.
When you
So
first start, yeah, you
when you
might
first
work
start,
up to a month. Yeah,
work up to a month. So, but you specifically wrote, right, I'm going to take so and so off. Don't care if you pay, if I don't get paid for it. I remember
right.
you were saying in the book, no, you can't do that. And he's like, well, watch me, sort of stuff. But
Yeah,
at that time, though, when you did that again, risking your career, was that not a concern? Because again, as I said to you, people didn't travel that often. Nowadays, if people did it, I guess it's fine because people do travel. But in that time when you were doing it, did you not think to yourself, I could be losing my job, might not have a job when I get back to America or back to the job itself?
yeah. I didn't know if I was going to have a job when I got back, but I was determined to take a month off. And when I got back, and I really did have to fight for it, but I just said, I'm doing this. I basically announced it. You don't think I can do it? Read the handbook. It says I can do it. I'm doing it. And when I got back, they were so impressed that I had the nerve to do it that I got a huge promotion.
Oh,
You want
okay, yes.
you want to get it reinforced that you need to take risks. Boy, did that ever do it.
Mm,
And then I had one other corporate job, and then I was a partner in a firm, and then I went out on my own, largely because I wanted 10 weeks vacation a year, minimally. And I was determined to do that. And so I became a consultant, had a successful career as a consultant, and took a load of time off. Plus, I was traveling internationally all the time. And because I was a consultant, nobody was expecting me back at the office. I could say to someone, yeah, I'm on business for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be out of the country. The fact that I was only actually working for a week, nobody needed to know that.
Exactly.
And so I would go to wherever, if I was in Australia, I would go down to Tasmania, or I would go, to Adelaide, or I'd go to the outback, wherever, just because I had the ability to do it. And somebody had paid for my flight there. I was going to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. And I'm very pleased as well to read one of the chapters where you found love as well. A lot of people, when they travel, it's difficult to settle down. But for yourself, you talk about extensively how you actually found love, and you mentioned before as well you were in a serious relationship. So was that important to you as well to have a bit of a balance in your life? That travel was there, but also you were also thinking about other parts of your life, making
Yes,
sure you had a companion in some respects.
absolutely. I always had a home that I could come back to that felt it was my refuge after a lot of travel. I could come back and it was peaceful and it was quiet and it was my place. And I had as you say, someone who I shared my life with when I was in New York, and I had a lot of friends in New York. So I had this balance of getting to do the things I loved overseas and having stability at home. And that was important to me. To have that balance. People talk about work life balance. In my case, it was travel and home balance as much as work life balance.
Don't think you've really announced it, but you're working on a new book.
Just got my publication date, October 3rd, 2023.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, so it's coming up, and I haven't finished writing it yet.
So
Um,
what is it about though?
okay, this one's called People, Places, and Food. And there are a lot of food stories in it, which I didn't really talk about in the first book.
Hmm.
Because when you travel, there are lots of food stories, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there are, the worst meal I ever had, which is extremely, describe it to people and they kind of, ugh. And places I take cooking classes wherever I go. And some of the cooking classes have been astounding. I took one in Cartagena that was in someone's private home. And I would never get into someone's private home in Cartagena normally, but we spent the day there and it was fascinating. It was absolutely got to meet his kids and, so a lot of experiences, um, just cooking and eating and people I've met while I've been traveling who've been absolutely memorable for all kinds of reasons, and places that are in the far corners of the earth. There's one whole story about a town called Andamuka in Australia, and it's an opal mining town that has a population of 12, and spent a couple of days there. It was talk about the ends of the earth. Homes are underground because it's the only place you can live because it gets so hot. But if you're underground, it's cool. And then they described it to me that when you want to actually find more opals, you put in a permit to make another room. Because basically what you're doing is you're mining, but now you have another bedroom. And anyhow, it was fascinating. So lots of those kinds of things that are, really off the beaten path kinds of places. Um, and so it's more stories and very different ones than the ones that were in the first book.
What do you expect people to gain from reading that?
Well, my goal for the first book, and it is the same for the second, is to inspire people to get out and see the world. That really is the bottom line for this. And I told you before that there was a woman who I don't know who invited me to her home in New Mexico. She told me that she had bought 12 copies of the book and given it away to friends, and that 4 of the 12 had decided they had to go take a trip. And they had never traveled solo before, and I gave them the courage to do it. Now,
Yeah.
yeah, and if I can do that, anybody I get out there to go see the world and experience it for themselves, I have succeeded. And I think that, it's just in addition to what I've done before. It's more get out there, go see the world. Anybody I can convince to go do that, I'm happy about.
Reading your first book, I couldn't put it down. That's how fascinating it was. And what really, really drew me to it as well when I was reading it is the way you've chaptered it as well, where 1950, 1960, 70, 80, 90, and that's where it's like, wow, this is like 60, 70 years worth of travel. If I can get to that position, I'll be very, very happy in my life anyway. So people have to pick up this book, current book anyway, Travel Mania. Where can you find the book?
It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's through the independent booksellers. And if you ask at any library or bookstore, if they don't have it, they can get it.
I wish you the best of luck with the second book, and congratulations on both books, really. And congratulations
thank you.
on a fantastic first book that you brought out. So people who haven't read it, please do buy it and read it, and read the journey and read the story of Karen. It's amazing. What do you do outside of your work and travel that keeps you sort of entertained? Have you got any sort of specific hobbies?
I used to have a massive garden, but now that I live in Manhattan, I no longer have a garden except on my terrace. But I am fanatic about flowers and gardens, so I go visit every garden I can, anywhere I can. During COVID, one of the things that I did to keep myself occupied was I started exploring New York City as a tourist. All the places I could go to that were not closed, which were gardens and so on. And I got fascinated in I collect outsider art, but I got interested in street art. And I will go see street art wherever it is and document it. And I have seen street art everywhere. And it's astounding all the places it is. So I'm very much into that. I am a photographer, take more photographs than I should. I write for fun. I have my Facebook page that I write every day with photographs. I cook, and professionally, I'm now retired, but I mentor people. I was an entrepreneur, and I now mentor entrepreneurs, people who are going into business or have a business and want to grow it. So I spend a lot of time doing that, and I've given dozens and dozens of webinars on entrepreneurship and consulting.
So you're still keeping yourself active and busy, which is great to hear.
Oh, yeah.
And that's important, though, isn't it? To keep yourself, when you retire, a lot of people think, what'd you do? I've heard this before, that when they retire, you think, actually, how did I even work with me having so much to do?
Yeah.
That's a common thing that people say. So it's great to hear. I'm sure there's possibly places that you still have on your bucket list that you want to maybe see. Is there any places left that you want to explore?
I've never been to the South Pacific, and I've wanted to go there for a long time. I was going to go there for my last birthday, but in the middle of COVID, that didn't seem like a very good idea. So that's very high on the list. There are a few places that politically, like Sri Lanka at the moment, maybe not so much. But yeah, there's tons. I've never been, I was on Borneo, but I've never been to New Guinea. And New Guinea is somewhere I have wanted to explore for years and years. So that's somewhere on my list. I've never been in Ethiopia. I'd love to go to Ethiopia, and I'd love to go to Ghana. I'm really hot on going to Ghana. So that's going to be as soon as I can go. However, I have 7 trips planned with air tickets in hand. So
you've always got a list of places that you always want to explore. There's always goals to see different places. So it's good to hear. Karen, before I let you go, how can people follow you directly and get in touch with you if they've got any questions?
I have a Facebook page. I have an author Facebook page. Just look up my name. There are no other Karen Gershowitzes that I know of. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram. I am on Twitter. And I've got a website. And I would highly recommend that if you do read the book, that you go onto the website, because if you look under Travel Mania, there's a section that says chapters. And if you look at each one of the chapters, there are a series of photographs that come from that trip. And there are hundreds and hundreds of photographs up there, and they kind of will show you what you're reading about. You can see what they look like on the website. And I have a blog on the website.
Get the book as soon as possible and give it a good read. Karen, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. When I get to New York, I'll definitely give you a call and we can hang out.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. And thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button to never miss an episode, and follow me on all of my social media platforms. That's it for Taking Wander with Shebs. Hope to see you all soon. Until next time, bye for now.